There's a whole cohort of people out there who can recall rotary dial phones and the debut of the first iPhone, and researchers still haven't settled on where they belong. If your birth year falls somewhere between 1976 and 1985, you technically sit at the trailing edge of Gen X, yet calling you a millennial doesn't quite fit either, no matter how often people try to force you into one label or the other. Around 2014, researchers began referring to this group as Xennials. A handful of sociologists have gone further and called it a microgeneration, since the birth year window is so narrow. Whatever happened during that particular stretch of history produced something genuinely worth digging into. So, in this video, we're taking a closer look at what makes this group psychologically distinct.
Right from childhood, you grew up in a purely analog world, one where being bored meant just sitting there with nothing to distract you, where memorizing phone numbers was simply part of life. And God forbid you missed an episode of your favorite show, it was gone for good, no do-overs. Then, almost exactly as you crossed into adulthood, everything flipped to digital. Not slowly either, it happened fast. The timing of that shift set off consequences that are still unfolding today. Most generations experience just one technological era growing up. Xennials, on the other hand, lived through two completely different worlds while they were still figuring out who they were. Your late teenage years barely resembled your 20s, and that gap was far more dramatic than what most generations go through.
Think about what that meant day to day. Remember passing folded notes in class, having conversations that vanished the moment they ended, or making plans with zero ability to text running late or where are you? You just went to the spot and hoped for the best. That demanded a completely different level of trust and follow-through than what people rely on now. Then your 20s arrived, and suddenly everyone had a cell phone. You signed up for Friendster, then MySpace, then Facebook. Before social platforms existed, there were basically 3 ways to reach someone: call their house, call their work, or physically show up. Then, all at once, you had a dozen-plus messaging apps to juggle, and somehow you just adapted.
You lived through both eras during the exact stretch of life when your brain was most capable of adapting. Research into brain development shows the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for adjusting to new circumstances and picking up complicated skills, doesn't finish developing until around age 25. A paper published in Nature Neuroscience confirmed that this brain region keeps maturing well into someone's 20s. That means Xennials were still inside that window of high neuroflexibility, precisely when the entire tech landscape got rebuilt from scratch. You were young enough to absorb new technology effortlessly, but old enough to remember exactly what life looked like beforehand.
Because Gen X was already grown when tech first showed up, they tend to approach it with some suspicion. Millennials, especially the younger ones, never knew a world without the internet at all. Xennials, though, straddled both realities, and that's produced something like a dual fluency that's genuinely uncommon. You can sit through a conversation without glancing at your phone every few seconds, yet you never get flustered learning a new app or platform.
You know what it's like to be completely unreachable for hours on end, something a lot of younger people have simply never experienced. At the same time, technology doesn't intimidate you the way it does some older generations.
This plays out in subtle ways you might not even clock. Take your relationship with privacy, for instance. It's just different from other generations. You came of age in an era where cringeworthy moments simply faded from memory instead of staying online forever. That awkward haircut in 7th grade, that messy breakup, that regrettable night out, none of it has photographic proof. It only survives as stories people retell. That creates a fundamentally different bond with your own history. Your memories were allowed to shift, to turn into stories, to change shape naturally, the way memory is actually built to work. You weren't locked into permanent documentation.
Studies on autobiographical memories suggest our brains store and retrieve personal experiences in a genuinely fluid way. We're wired to revise memories, hang on to what's important, and let the rest quietly fade. When everything gets permanently recorded and searchable, that natural editing process gets tangled up in ways researchers are still working to understand. But here's where it gets complicated. You also stepped into the workforce right around the 2008 financial meltdown. meaning a large share of this generation dealt with serious economic upheaval during precisely the years meant for building a career. That timing carries more weight than most people realize. Research on financial hardship shows that economic trauma experienced at this life stage can leave lasting psychological marks. People who go through job loss or financial instability during this period often keep carrying it with them long after their circumstances turn around. It reshapes how you view money, security, and risk in ways that don't just fade with time.
So you end up with a generation that learned to roll with massive technological upheaval, but also got financially blindsided right as they were trying to build a stable foundation. You know how to handle change because you had no choice. But there's also probably this quiet undercurrent. What if everything collapses again, running beneath your decisions? And barely anyone talks about that particular combination. The broader conversation about generations usually pits Gen X against millennials, as though anyone born after 1965 and before 2000 shares one identical experience. But the specific years you were born into, particularly during moments of rapid transformation, generate distinct realities that don't fit neatly into those wide categories.
Xennials carry a paradox that's honestly pretty rare. You've got Gen X's independence and skepticism since you grew up before helicopter parenting became the norm. Your parents likely had no idea where you were for stretches of the day, and that was completely normal. You figured out how to handle problems solo, entertain yourself, and sit with boredom or frustration without an adult swooping in to fix it. And yet, you also reached adulthood right as the early internet was promising to connect everyone and fix everything, before we collectively realized it might actually be complicating a few things too. It's a strange place to occupy.
Independent yet collaborative, skeptical yet hopeful, analog yet digital. What seems to set Xennials apart is this knack for holding contradictions without it feeling uncomfortable. You remember both the before and the after, which lets you clearly see what was gained and what got left behind. You're probably less nostalgic for the past than Gen X tends to be, since you genuinely value modern convenience too. Still, unlike a lot of younger generations, you're aware of exactly what got traded away.
You lost the ability to sit alone with your own thoughts without any effort involved. You lost the patience that comes from having to wait. You lost a certain quality of presence that existed back when there wasn't constantly something else fighting for your attention. But in exchange, you gained connection, access to information, and possibilities your younger self never could have pictured.
If you're a Xennial, you probably feel like you never fully belong anywhere. Too young for some things, too old for others, caught in the middle of two worlds. That's not a flaw. That's actually the core of what defines your generation's experience. In a world that keeps shifting faster than anyone can keep up with, having already lived through one massive transition might be one of the most valuable things you carry with you. You've learned to live a transitional lifestyle. The world you were raised in doesn't have to be the one you're stuck living in forever.
That's exactly why the Xennial experience is worth understanding. Not because it makes you special or superior, but because you lived through a very specific moment in history that taught you something the rest of us are still trying to work out: how to adapt without losing your sense of self along the way. If this struck a chord with you, I genuinely appreciate a subscribe. And if you'd like to support more content like this, consider becoming a channel member. It really does mean a lot. I've got a few more videos lined up that I think you'll connect with just as much. Different subjects, same kind of depth. See you in the next one.